Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Growers & Co. One of the more exciting developments in recent years is that thanks to Jean-Martin Fortier, the market gardener, and his team, there is now a clothing, tool, and apparel company that was built for exactly the type of work we talk about on this show. I know that I have personally grown tired of looking through workwear websites and catalogs built for fishing or carpentry to find what I need for market gardening. So I was thrilled when Growers & Co. came to fruition, and even more thrilled when I tried their clothing. They have done absolutely excellent work. Their clothing is well made and well fitted. The tools are designed by growers and made to last. There's also a magazine that Growers & Co. is putting out twice per year with a focus on small scale farming, but also that represents the dignity, skills, and creativity required to do this work. I love the clothes. I rock the Muscovich vest a lot. The shirts, the hats, all of it. Anyway, follow Growers & Co. on Instagram and all the platforms and check out what they have to offer at growers.co. Today's show is also brought to you by Farmers Web.
Farmers Web software gives you the tools you need to manage your entire sales process. Built specifically for farmers' needs, Farmers Web helps you save time, reduce errors, increase efficiency, and provides flexibility for working seamlessly with your whole customer base. Our free account includes features for sharing your real-time and coming soon product availability, as well as the option to create an availability calendar to inform buyers about your product's seasonality. Free accounts also include access to Farmers Web's how-to guides, offering pro tips and best practices on selling online to individual buyers, as well as how to work with such buyers as restaurants, schools, and stores. A 1-month free trial is available for the paid account, which includes all features to manage customers and orders, including accepting online credit card sales, handling advanced pickup or delivery orders, giving select buyers special pricing and payment terms, tracking your buyers' payments, keeping detailed sales records, and much more. Even manage orders and payments for buyers not placing their orders online. Request a demo and learn more at farmersweb.com.
Big thanks to our show sponsors. All right, let's jam. Hey, well, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 20, season 3. Got a great episode for you all this week with Michelle Aronson of Farmbelly in North Carolina, who started a beautiful market garden with the plan of hosting events and cooking classes. And, well, then COVID hit and plans sort of changed a little. So we talk about that. We talk about why Michelle does not do her own plant starts for the moment. We talk a little about deer fencing and aesthetics and a cooking school in Ireland on a 100-acre farm. Really fun conversation, and I am super excited to share it. But first, have you checked out our new podcast collaboration with Clara Coleman called the Winter Growers Podcast? There are 3 episodes up as I post this, with several more on the way. You can find that wherever you are finding this, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, make sure to pre-order a copy of my forthcoming book, The Living Soil Handbook. But make sure to pick it up from no-tillgrowers.com because the proceeds from that sale go to making more content. I'm not personally keeping any of the money from that sale. I get like a couple dollars royalty or something from the publisher, but the sale at no-tillgrowers.com goes directly back into supporting our work, and we have a really amazing and very expensive project coming in the fall, and maybe another podcast series or several. We'll see. Anyway, check that out, no-tillgrowers.com. Enough from me. Let's get into this amazing conversation with Michelle Aronson of Farmbelly. Michelle Aronson, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
And so glad to have you. Okay, let's start where we always start. Give us the rundown. Where are you located? What kind of acreage are you working on and those sorts of things?
Our farm is located about 20 minutes west of Chapel Hill. So we're in an area what's known as the Triangle of North Carolina. Our property is about 10 acres total, and we are actively farming about 1/3 of an acre with a small market garden. It's mostly outdoor beds, but we do have a few caterpillar tunnels that we grow in as well. We have some chickens for selling eggs, and we're also in the process of planting some fruit trees. So we have a small apple orchard, we have blueberries, fig trees, pawpaws, that sort of thing. And then the back kind of like 5 acres of our property, we call it the back 5. It's a little wild and semi-wooded back there. And eventually we'd like to run pigs in that area. But right now it's just kind of nice little walking trails going back there.
Nice. And are you living on that property?
Yes. There's an old farmhouse that's been here for a long time that we live in.
Nice. Okay, so take us through marketing. What's the sort of produce selling strategy and those sorts of things?
Yeah, so last year was our first year of really growing and selling here, and we were ready to sell produce like 2 weeks after everything kind of shut down due to COVID. So we had to pivot a little bit because a big part of our business, or my business, is teaching cooking classes, like farm-to-table cooking classes. So those obviously had to all go on hold. So we pretty quickly pivoted and created kind of like an online pre-order system for a weekly farm stand. So people place their orders online through my website. And then I actually work with several other growers and producers in the area. You know, there's someone who bakes bread. We have mushrooms, flowers, seedlings, things like that. And then they pick up either here or there's a few other pickup locations around town.
Sidetrack for a second with those other vendors there. How does that work? They are updating on your site and then their inventory, and then you're sort of selling that and putting it in the bags that you're, or the sales that you're doing, the online sales? Yeah.
So the way it works is I basically reach out to all the other vendors that I'm working with at the beginning of the week. And then on Thursdays is when I kind of update the inventory on my site. So they just kind of let me know I have this many bundles of flowers or, you know, this many loaves of bread. And so I upload the inventory. And then people basically just pre-order over the weekend. And then usually on Mondays is when I will kind of coordinate and pick up any items from other vendors, or they'll deliver to me. And then the actual pickup is on Tuesdays.
Okay. And then I kind of interrupted you describing the rest of your marketing, how that's all sold and picked up.
Yeah. So the main way that we sell our produce is through the farm stand. And I would say from the very beginning, had really an amazing just turnout in the community. I feel like a lot of it was just word of mouth. And we started at a time when people were really just wanting to know more closely where their food was coming from. You know, people were really afraid of going to the grocery store. And so to offer just like a safe, touchless, contactless place where people could come and get not just vegetables, but all kinds of different things for their tables, I think was really just something that people were looking for. So that, honestly, we sell out almost all of our produce just through the farm stand. But I do sell any surplus that we have. You know, I kind of a list of different chefs and restaurants that we work with. But the farm stand is definitely the main outlet for us.
And was that kind of in the business plan originally that you were going to do a farm stand, or did that just, you know, with COVID, obviously that kind of manifested itself, but was that sort of part of the original plan, or what did the original sort of business plan look like?
That is a great question. I feel like I was definitely a little naive and like flying by the seat of my pants a bit. You know, the cooking classes were really a big part of what I did, and hopefully we'll do again eventually. But I honestly think when we were first, you know, planning out for last year, I was thinking of doing a farm stand as opposed to a CSA because this is our first season growing here, and I just didn't want to commit to a certain number of shares if I wasn't sure that we could really deliver that. But I think honestly what I thought we were going to do was just have like a roadside stand. We have a nice little like carport space right on our farm that's easy for people to get to. And I was like, oh, you know, just like set up some veggies, you know, a day a week, and people will just know to come between this time and just kind of show up and shop. And I'm really glad that COVID actually forced us to like get ourselves together and create this pre-order system, because with that, people, you know, if you've ordered something, they've committed and they're definitely going to come and pick it up. And, you know, a lot of things actually sell out fairly quickly. So there's a bit of a sense of urgency. You know, people are literally like waiting by their computers at 7:00 on Thursdays to place their orders, which is great. And I feel like if we didn't have that system, we definitely wouldn't have the same sort of demand that I feel like we have now.
Yeah. So then you were going to do, like in the original design, you were kind of going to have farm cooking classes and then sort of farm tours and that sort of thing. And then with COVID, that fell out. So were you kind of able to make up some of what you'd anticipated making by just growing the vegetables and selling them through the farm stand? Or was that a pretty significant blow to the business plan?
Yeah, I think at first it was definitely a bit of a blow, just because it took us a little while to get just some of our successions going, and it's just like not what we had planned for. It was for the produce to be our main income. But I'd say by the summer, we definitely had pivoted pretty hard. And in some ways, it was actually really nice to be able to just focus on the farm for this first year. The classes I love, but it takes a lot of energy and a lot of just time. And so to be able to really just devote that to getting the farm infrastructure in place and just kind of get things dialed in this first year, I think we were able to grow better and more plentiful produce. So it ended up working out. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, so take us back a little bit. Like, I want to hear sort of what your sort of origin story is in terms of how you got into farming and cooking.
Yeah, so I am from the Midwest originally. I'm from like the suburbs of St. Louis. And I definitely did not grow up cooking or gardening at all, from a very kind of typical Midwestern upbringing. So it wasn't actually until I went to college. I went to University of Virginia, and I think I was a freshman. And it wasn't any one thing. It was kind of a combination of just books I was reading and movies I was watching and people I was talking to. And something like hit me. And I felt like I just realized I was meant to use my hands and grow food and feed people. And I feel like I haven't really looked back since. So, when I was in college, pretty much every summer, even during the year, I would work on different farms. I helped start like an educational farm for the university, and then actually got to stay on and manage that project after I graduated, which was a really amazing experience, because that was, I probably was not qualified to do this, but, we were basically starting like a 1 acre kind of market garden from scratch. And I was like 20 years old. And it's actually still going, which is really cool. And it was a great experience for me, and just kind of, starting something from scratch. But at that point, I still really had no idea how to cook anything. And I was like growing all this amazing produce and still had no confidence in the kitchen. So I decided to go to culinary school at a place called Ballymaloe, which nobody in the U.S. has heard of for the most part, but it's a farm-based cooking school in Ireland. And it is just like heaven on earth. It is a 100-acre organic farm on the coast of Ireland. And pretty much everything that you cook with comes from the farm. So coming from, a agricultural background, like that was the sort of cooking that I wanted to be doing, where the focus was getting the best ingredients and how do you make them shine. And coming home from that experience, I actually moved to Santa Barbara, where my now husband was there for school and then for work. Santa Barbara was very lovely. There's like just so much amazing produce there. So I had a lot of different jobs between, I was working in some kitchens. I was an elementary garden educator. I helped actually manage another kind of university farm for a small college there. And that's actually when I started teaching cooking classes and kind of started this business of Farmbelly. So I teach farm-to-table cooking classes for people. And the dream was always to eventually have like a farm-based cooking school. And that is definitely not very possible in Southern California. It's just way too cost prohibitive for us. So in the end of 2018 is when my husband and I decided to move back to the East Coast. So we, for various reasons, decided to land in the Triangle area of North Carolina, and pretty quickly found our farm here and just got rolling.
Nice. Is your husband from North Carolina?
He's actually from Virginia, but we both have some family in this area.
The culinary school in Ireland with the 100-acre farm, tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what is a sort of day in the life of a culinary student at a farm-to-table culinary school? Like, what is that like?
is heaven, truly. So most students will choose to live on the farm. They have these like adorable little cottages where you get to live, and there's kitchens where you kind of cook for yourself for most of your meals. But I'd say the experience, it is very much on a farm, but you're expected to really spend your time cooking, not so much like farming. So you are involved in like farm chores. So, every day you're assigned, like, you're taking the compost to the chicken, or taking the compost out, or you're feeding the chickens, or you are harvesting the greens for the salad. Just kind of quickly, the way the school works is in the mornings, we all cook together various recipes that we've been assigned. And then in the afternoon, there's like a demonstration. It's like 3 hours where the teachers basically demonstrate like 20 different recipes like in front of you, and then you get to taste them all. And then basically what you saw in that afternoon demo is what you're then assigned to cook the next day, if that makes sense. And truly, and I was there from April to July. It's a 3-month program, but they run it at a few different times of the year. But I definitely think that April to July is an ideal time to go, just because there's so much amazing produce available. And so, truly almost everything that we're cooking with is either coming from, Ballymaloe's farm or from other local producers. And you definitely were encouraged to pursue, if you were really interested in sourdough, or at the time I was actually, I had a gluten-free diet. So I was trying to really hone in on some gluten-free recipes, or if you loved fermenting, you were really encouraged to kind of dive into whatever you were most excited about.
Okay, that's neat. All right. So talk a little bit about how the farm came to be, when you moved back, you bought this 10 acres, and what did it look like? What was on it, and what, maybe take us through the process of building it up.
Yeah, sure. So this property actually has a really cool history of being a farm in the community, all like women farmers, which is also very cool. But it's mostly been used for raising livestock like cattle, beef, meat birds. So there wasn't any infrastructure in place for growing vegetables. So yeah, last year was definitely, or basically from when we moved on to the farm, which was, I guess, August of 2019, there was a lot of work to kind of get things running. But I will say the timing worked out really well. To land there in August basically meant that I had 6 months to kind of get everything squared away before the spring. So that was kind of a lucky accident. But yeah, I can kind of take folks through the process of how we got the land prepped. There was kind of a clear spot, like an old pasture, where we knew we wanted the main market garden to go. But first there were actually a few trees, like big cedar trees that had to get taken out and had the stumps ground. And once that was done, we had, we don't have a tractor. We're at a scale where we don't need a tractor. So I had a neighbor come in and kind of subsoil the different plots, just kind of open everything up. The land had been pretty compacted over time. And we let it kind of just sit opened up like that, and have a few good rains come through just to kind of soak water down through the soil. And then I had a lot of tarps through this process. We basically knew where, I call them quadrants, kind of the main growing quadrants were going to be. So we put tarps over those quadrants to kind of start trying to kill any of the grass and the weeds. And we let that sit for about a month. And then our neighbor came back with his tractor and used a harrow to just kind of, break up some of the clods and make it a bit of a smoother surface to work with. And after he did that, we kind of more carefully measured out where the growing quadrants were going to be. And we had a bunch of compost brought in, and we just piled each of those quadrants pretty high with compost, and then put the tarps back on, and basically just let it sit for 6 months. And then when spring rolled around, we were able to pull the tarps off, and it had really done an amazing job of killing any grass and weeds. And, the soil was kind of just warm, and it just felt alive, which was really nice to see. So that was kind of, the first part of prepping the soil. And then, meanwhile, we had to build a deer fence, install our irrigation. We built a small a 50-foot caterpillar tunnel as well, so that we could start kind of growing things starting in February as well.
What's the deer fence look like? Is that like an 8-foot tall woven wire?
Yeah, it's a rolled woven wire. Or is that the same? Hold on. I'm going to pause here. I wrote this down because I want to make sure I said the right thing. Okay, so our fencing is 8-foot tall rolled wire fencing. And I think the brand is DS0. It's DEACERO. So it's high quality. It's I think it's going to hold up for a while. So basically we have, and I had a friend, a fellow farmer, really helped us with the fence. He's like the fence guru of this area. And so he actually helped, he like bought all the materials and was kind of the brains behind the operation. And we were just there as like labor to help put it up. But he basically has like big, thick wood posts in each corner. And then there's kind of braced wooden posts to just kind of make sure that corners are sturdy. And then down the long edges, we have 10-foot tall T-posts every 20 or 25 feet. And one thing I will say about the deer fence that I'm really glad we did was we put in as many gates as possible. So we have like one at a main entrance, and then in all of the other corners of the fence, we have gates, which I'm really glad we did, just because it would be really annoying if we were kind of doing work in one end of the field, and if we had to like walk to the totally other end just to get out. And I'll mention this because in case people have also inherited a farm with like lots of old farm materials lying around, we inherited a lot of old gates. So we actually inherited a few. They were 8 foot long and 4 feet high. And so we actually just turned them on their side. So from going horizontal to going vertical. So they were 8 feet tall, 4 feet wide, as became some of our gates. Because for people who have gone through this process, they can be incredibly expensive. So if you can reuse anything that you already have, that'll definitely help keep down costs.
That's super clever. I like that idea. And then also once you start having more tours, once you're able to do that more, being able to go from one side of the farm to the other without having to go back is probably going to be a boon.
We also, a friend welded together, we had two 14-foot wide gates that were like 4 feet, 5 feet tall. And a 14-foot wide gate would be really expensive, but we wanted at least one gate that was quite big in case we needed to get big equipment through. And so he just welded the two of them on top of each other. And it definitely looks a little funny, but it totally works, and it saved us like several $100s. That's
great. Okay, so these quadrants that you were talking about, what's between them? It's just big grass pathways?
Yeah.
Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So there's 4 kind of main growing quadrants on one side, and then we have a big barn, and then on the other side we have like another kind of growing well, it's not a quadrant because then that would be the 5th one, but another growing area where we also have our tunnels. But in the area where we have the 4 quadrants, we do have big like grassy pathways between them, and that was definitely an intentional choice because this is a space where eventually we hope to have tours and people coming through more often. I wanted to have space for people to walk and gather, and I definitely have dreams of having like farm dinners in the pathways or in those kind of pathways in between the different quadrants. So that was an intentional choice to kind of leave those wider, even though we did lose a bit of growing space.
And then what keeps them, like, are you just edging the sides or is there plastic down? Like, what's keeping them from, how are you differentiating between the garden and the pathway?
So we use landscape fabric. I get 4 foot wide fabric and then we fold it in half. So it ends up being 2 feet, but it's doubled up just to kind of give it a bit of extra protection. And then we put that landscape fabric around the perimeter of each quadrant, which really helps. It looks nice, but it definitely helps with keep grass from creeping in.
And then you're just mowing right up against it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Hey, y'all, jumping in real quick to get a word from our sponsors like Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil makes NOP-compliant living potting soils in Cleveland, Ohio with food scraps they haul and compost themselves. Each batch of soil is tested against the competitors and the results are in. Plants vote for Tilth Soil. To learn more about their full line of products, please visit www.tilthsoil.com. The show is also brought to you by you, our patrons. Did you know that we have almost 600 patrons at patreon.com/no-till-growers? That is so incredible, and it is also so vital to our work. You all are the absolute best. I appreciate each and every one of you so much. If you love this show, or the No-Till Flowers podcast, or Growers Live, or the Winter Growers podcast, or our videos, or anything else we do, and you want to support it, go to patreon.com/no-till-growers and consider signing up. And at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs this week to Gabriel Bowman Baker, Ojai Roots, Scott Harris, Dan Fort, Earth Care Farmer, Jane Murner Cynical, Asia Smith, Rimmel Greenhouse Systems, Scott Snodgrass, Andrew and Haley Keeler of Avoda Sustainable Acres, Jody Miller, Shane and Emma of Aslan Organics, Tony Lopez, Clement, Thomas Eliason, Travis and Heidi of Arcadia Acres, Judson Taylor, John Mills, Grown Up Farm, Jacob Arthur, Clara Coleman, Wild Mountain Seeds, Bob and Ann Patton of Hexhamshire Organics, Jared Kirst, Jay Armour, Dan Brisebois, C. Mac Small, Jay McCombs, Tim Baldwin, Marc-Andre Giroux, Jessica Merrick, Esoterra Culinary, Steve Larson, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, Jean-Martin Fortier, Yannick Laplante, and Jen Lawrence. Thank you to everyone who supports our show. You can also find more ways to support our work, including the cryptocurrencies that we take, over at no-tillgrowers.com/support. All right, back to Michelle. The Caterpillar Tunnel, are you doing starts out of that, or what's your sort of, plant transplant situation?
Yeah, so I kind of made an intentional decision when we were putting all the infrastructure in place, that at least for these first few years, we don't have a greenhouse set up. So I work with, there's a great nursery kind of in Western North Carolina called Banner. And then also just have, some other local farm friends, and I work with them for most of our starts. I have a little mini greenhouse set up in our house, any like cucurbits, things that are super fast, things that are fast or like funky. Like I love growing edible flowers, or if there's just kind of a few random things, I'll start those myself. But yeah, I do think there's a bit of a stigma, around farmers like starting all of their own starts. And while that is great if you have that capacity, I think especially when you're just starting out, the time and the money that it takes to really have a solid greenhouse setup, can be pretty intense. And so I think for us, that just didn't make sense to devote that much time and money to greenhouse in these first few years. So I'm very happy to leave that job to other folks, and our main job is just to prep the soil so that when the seedlings do come, they're going to be very happy.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Just the idea of not having to learn that complicated of a skill set. Like growing your own starts is actually pretty complicated. It requires some good technical know-how. Even just watering stuff, knowing how to water is complicated. Some things can't really be watered overhead. And temperatures, all of that stuff. It's a complicated business starting seeds. And the one hang up is that it seems at least less expensive to start your own than buy them from somewhere like Banner or one of the greenhouses in an area. That upfront price it can be kind of a big hurdle, but it's not as expensive as having really poor plant starts trying to do it all your own.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have plans to do more greenhouse production or more transplant production, anything like that in that realm?
I'd say, in the 5-year plan, definitely. But I think for right now, this season for sure, and probably for the next year or two at least, we'll continue doing it this way. But eventually, yeah, I would definitely love to have our own dedicated greenhouse.
So you mentioned before when we were talking before we started the recording that you have a part-time job. Like, how did that decision come about? And then like, how's balancing those two things?
So I am really lucky to have a part-time job that is very flexible and completely remote. I can work from home. I basically manage communications for a local nonprofit, and it's an incredible organization that also does work actually in food. So it really ties in well with what I already love to do. And I felt like it was important, especially in these first few years of, getting our farm going. It was nice to kind of have a bit of a buffer and to have a job to kind of be bringing in a bit more steady income. Because I'll be totally honest, in this first, in the last season, I didn't pay myself at all from anything we were making from the farm. I pretty much put it all back into the business. And at this point, we're in a place where we've, for a greenhouse, have really put in most of the infrastructure that we needed. So I do feel like I'm in a place now this year where I'm able to pay myself, which is very exciting. But I'm someone who likes to kind of have lots of different pots on different fires. So I do enjoy kind of using a different part of my brain with my other job. But eventually it would be nice to be able to just focus solely here. But it's been really nice to have in these first few years as we get started.
Yeah. And I think speaking, we talked about the stigma of the plant starts earlier. There is also, and I think we've talked about this on the podcast, the stigma of having work outside of the farm. And especially in your first few years, I think that is a great form of capital. Like, it can be exhausting, obviously. But if you don't start with a lot of startup capital, to have that cash flow from just working a part-time job can be really a huge stress reliever.
Yeah,
and
exactly. And I also think when it takes a little bit of the pressure off, having to solely make your income from your farm in those first few years, which it just makes it a lot more enjoyable to not have all of that pressure on yourself in those first few years.
Yeah. And then can you talk a little bit? No, and I totally agree. I mean, I think that we've, Hannah and I've periodically, because we've moved so much, we've picked up jobs randomly throughout our farming career of just to pay for a move or pay for a new. I've done it where I did catering for a while, just to pay for like tools that I wanted that I couldn't quite afford from the farm yet. And yeah, I think that, I mean, it can be a good way to leverage like a skill set, or also get to know, if you're a server or you're a cook, to like get to go know some chefs and some restaurant people, and that always pays down the line.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So let's talk a little infrastructure. What all are you working with in terms of, like, you mentioned the cat tunnel, and then what is the rest of the farm stand? Do you have like a designated sort of washback area and that sort of stuff set up yet?
Yes. So we did not start the year with a dedicated wash pack, which was really painful. But by kind of the end of the summer, we were able to really build it out. I mentioned before, we have a really cool old barn. We're pretty sure it was built in the 40s. It's like your classic red barn. And it has, kind of eaves off of both of the sides. And so on one of the sides, we actually have a little, called the barn bar. Got a little bar set up there for when we can have people over again. And on the other side is where we had kind of dedicated to our wash pack. It's nice because it gets shady most of the day. And we basically put fabric down and then gravel down. And I was able to, through Craigslist, get a bunch of nice kind of stainless steel tables as kind of our workspace. And then I was able to get a grant through our county to put in a walk-in cooler. So we did have a Store It Cold is the company, but it's a CoolBot cooler, which was definitely a game changer because for the most of the year, we did not have any, cold storage like that. So I was basically storing things when we needed to store in coolers, like filled with ice, or we had a few like random fridges that we were able to get plugged into the barn, but it was just a hot mess. So really, really glad that we have a walk-in cooler now. And grateful that our county, so it's basically through, there's an economic development office through Orange County, and they have a grant specifically for small farms. I think it's up to $10,000, which is pretty great. And it's geared towards projects that are going to help a farm just be more financially sustainable, or just improve their profitability. So for us, it was a walk-in cooler. I know some other folks have used that grant to build another cat tunnel or a root cellar, things like that. So definitely the walk-in cooler is an investment, but for folks who are trying to figure out a way to afford it, I would recommend kind of looking into what your county or local state, what grants might be offered to help you offset those costs.
Yeah. And I guess every region is going to have their own grant options. I mean, there's some national ones, the NRCS, I think, is everywhere, the high tunnel grant. But we locally have one in Kentucky called the KSU Small Farmer Grant that does something similar. I think it's up to $5,000 or $10,000. I can't remember. But yeah, this sort of the same sort of thing where you're either adding a value-added product or something like that, and or you're adding some infrastructure like that. Those are great. I think grants are underutilized a lot of times, especially when you're, and this seems to be a theme of what we're talking about, when you're just starting a farm and maybe you don't quite have a ton of capital, looking to see what other capital is out there that you can sort of leverage for, building up your farm.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like so much of farming is just problem solving and fixing things and, getting creative with what you have and with what, the local community is able to share and offer.
And you did a video with Josh Satin, and in that video you talk about doing tea blends. Could you expand on that a little bit? What's the situation with the tea blends? How does that work?
Sure. I'd say in general, I really, especially coming from kind of a culinary background as well, and because we're so small, I feel like creating more value-added products is really, helpful for our bottom line. And so tea blends is something that I've worked on some other farms that have done that and kind of gotten inspiration from them. So I, just dedicated a few rows to growing things like tulsi or anise hyssop, lemon bergamot, a lot of lemon balm, mint, things like that. And basically what we do is a lot of those, you can harvest multiple times throughout the season, and they kind of just keep coming back. And then I have a drying room actually in our house. We just have a dehumidifier set up, and we kind of string things up overhead, which looks pretty cool and funny when people come to visit and they're like, what is happening in here? So we kind of dry everything out, get all the moisture out, and then we pack them away. And then when it comes time to make a blend, I kind of just pull from, what are the different kind of plants that I'm able to work with. So recently we had a really nice blend. It was tulsi, lemon bergamot, and anise hyssop, and some lemon verbena I think we also had in there. And people loved it. And it definitely is a high touch product to have to, grow it, harvest it, dry it, pack it away, make the blends. But an ounce of the tea we were selling for, I think $12 or $13, which I actually think I've seen people charge a lot more. So, it is a nice value added product if it's something that you're excited about, but I wouldn't recommend it for someone who could care less about tea. Right.
With those, so you're selling it loose essentially in bags, or you're doing tiny tea bags as well?
We sell it loose.
Okay. And that's like the 1 ounce.
I sold it as 1 ounce and then also as half ounce.
And then what's the packaging on that?
They are like little brown craft bags that have like a window, so you can kind of see into the mix, which is nice. I'm not necessarily sold on that packaging, but it's probably the most economical, and it still looks nice. But I know some people will pack it into like clear jars or into tins. But the bags seem to work well for us this past year.
Nice. Okay, so I want to talk soil practices a little bit. You talked a little bit about setup. Can you talk about just general bed management with a little bit? Like, what's your sort of approach there?
Sure. I'd say, our practices are pretty standard with most other market gardeners. We have 30-inch beds. If we're going to prep or flip a bed, our first step is we'll go through with a broad fork. Maybe eventually we won't need broad fork every time, but because, a lot of this land is still so new, we're only in our second season. It definitely, I can tell it needs to be broad forked. After we do that, we'll lay down a pretty good layer of compost. And then the other amendments that we will put down right now are feather meal, and then a mix called Harmony, which some folks will be familiar with. It's like a composted chicken manure that's certified organic, and it's kind of got a nice blend of nutrients for the plant. So we'll kind of put those amendments down, and then we'll just use the tilther to tilt it all in. And at that point, we're ready to plant.
Nice. And did you mention, maybe I missed it, what type of soil you're working with?
We're actually pretty lucky to have, we're like typical North Carolina kind of clayey soil, but I'd say those first few inches are actually still quite nice because the spot that we're growing in used to be pasture for animals for decades. We're lucky to have actually really high organic matter in a lot of spots. So we actually got pretty lucky there.
Right. When I think of North Carolina, especially that area, I think of clay. Everybody I've spoken with pretty much is clay, unless you get closer to the ocean, then it's maybe a little bit more sandy.
Right.
I want to talk about, in terms of since this was your first year on that property, were there any big lessons in this sort of soil realm that you learned?
I'd say one thing that we're still working through is drainage. We are farming on a bit of a slope, especially there's two of our quadrants that are at an even kind of more significant slope. And so we are still kind of working through what's the best way, whether it's trenches or French drains or, different methods for making sure that the water is running where we want it to go. So that's definitely something I feel like you have to, you have to just figure it out as you go. It takes putting some things in place and then seeing kind of where the water runs. It's not something that I don't think I would have done anything differently necessarily when we were getting things established, but it's how do you make adjustments? When we do have a big rain event, I can see, okay, there's a problem spot. I need to rework some things to make sure that, this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. A lot of people say when you're getting ready to buy a farm, you should go there when, when it's through all the conditions, through a nice day, through heavy rainfall, through wind, all the things, and you need to try and learn. But that's so unrealistic for most of us.
Right.
To be able to do that, especially before you buy a farm, if you're afraid it's going to get sold. Maybe you can do that in a leasing situation, but with buying a farm, it's much harder. So that idea of kind of learning as you go, I think is, it's kind of inherent. You'll set up a garden exactly the way you think it should be. And then you come back and you're like, oh, I didn't even think about how water would pool in this one area, or didn't realize how wet it stays in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I will mention just about our pathways between our beds. We don't use wood chips or any mulch in our pathways. And we do have our beds sitting pretty high, if that makes sense. So we basically, another part of the process when we're kind of flipping a bed or getting it ready to get planted again is we'll, take a square shovel and really kind of dig out the pathway and put that soil back onto the bed. And one of the benefits of that is, when we do have a big rain event, and eventually the water, does all drain fine, but in the middle of a massive rainstorm, there's quite a bit of water that might be sitting in the pathways. And if our beds weren't quite so high, they would get completely washed out. And we never had that issue, but I've definitely seen other farms struggle with that just because, especially around here, we can have pretty massive rain events, and so to have your beds completely washed out can be pretty devastating. So because ours are a bit higher because of how we dig out our pathways, that hasn't been an issue.
Any other lessons? I don't know, maybe crop specific?
One, we had a failure, pretty much entire failure this fall with our broccoli. We had gotten our start from a nursery, and I actually think that the fungus was on the plants from when they arrived, because it was pretty immediate, seeing, like, just based on the leaves, like, you could tell something was going on with a fungal issue there. And I just didn't really know. I kind of like ignored it. I was like, oh, it's fine. I'm just gonna like pull those leaves off. It's gonna be great. And it just kind of decimated the plants. And I actually worked with talked to some other farmers around here who dealt with similar things. And something that they recommended, which other folks might be familiar with, is called Green Cure, which is an organic approved product. It's 85% potassium bicarbonate. And it basically, you can also use it for things like powdery mildew. It's just supposed to help kind of cut down on fungus growth. And I really wish I had known about that sooner and started applying that sooner, because by the time I really started kind of taking control of it, it was too late.
Yeah, that could be so tough in the middle of the season. I feel like there's something every year where I see a problem and I'm like, it'll be fine. Yeah. And then I don't do anything preemptive. And I heard somebody once say, like, the difference between a good farmer and a bad farmer is the good farmer is the one that makes the decision before anything happens, or like immediately when they see a problem.
Right.
And the bad farmer is the one that's like, oh, I'll get to that later.
Right.
And I'm definitely, like, unfortunately, sometimes more on that I'll get to it later side. But yeah, no, I definitely feel your pain on that just seeing it and then realizing that, you didn't do anything about it in the moment.
One thing that this kind of just goes to like general farm management that I am pretty religious about is keeping like a farm log or journal, where basically any day that I'm out there that I'm doing, whether it's planting, harvesting, treating plants for fungus, like I just write everything down. And it just is so helpful as you're looking back and planning for the next season of like, oh, when did that fungus show up? Like, when do I need to make sure that I'm on top of that? Or, how many weeks after I planted the radishes in March were they ready? Or like, when was the last planting of radishes that I could do before it was just like too hot and they weren't happy anymore? And it's just like writing all of those things down, which sounds obvious, but when you're tired and that's like the last thing you want to do. But it is so helpful in just kind of keeping things dialed in for future seasons.
And you're doing that journal spreadsheet style? Is it online? Like, are you like a physical journal? Like, what's your preference there?
So I do that journaling that I was just talking about, just in like a Google Doc. So it's just like by the end of the year, it's like 100 pages. But I use the Control S feature to like search for things. If I'm like curious about, the timing of our cucumbers or whatever it was, I'll just do like Control S and search for cucumbers. But then when it comes to actually making our planting plans, I do use like a spreadsheet to basically just create like an overhead map of the farm. And like I kind of finished this process a few weeks ago, basically like planning out the entire season, bed by bed. Okay, so we're going to start in this bed with whatever plant, and at what point is it going to transition over to the next crop? And obviously things are going to change and it doesn't always stay the same, but it's at least a helpful starting point.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it can be hard to take those notes, and I'm not always the best about it. But no, I think it's important to be able to look back on it and then read through those in the, leading up to the season or in the middle of the season when you have a question. Making it something searchable is also key.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm wondering, like, in terms of, this is just sort of a thought I had about talking, in the future, having more farm tours and doing dinners and that stuff, that puts a lot of pressure on the aesthetics of your farm. So like, in terms of, you couldn't have necessarily like a super weedy farm with like a bunch of overgrown grass. And I mean, I guess you could, but in theory, you'd want something that's nice and clean that feels like a like a English garden or something that you're walking into is a diner. Does that pressure, like, do you feel that pressure when you're thinking about going forward, or like, what are some things that you've designed around that to keep the aesthetics of that, suitable to maybe having dinners and that sort of thing?
Right. I'd say I'm already naturally inclined to be a bit of a type A farmer where I like things to be really clean and tidy and as weed free as possible. And I'd say I've worked mostly for farmers who have similar aesthetics. And so for me, it's just kind of like natural to do that, to keep things looking quite nice. And it's also something that I'm able to do because we are on such a small scale. And so that, the scale that we chose was very intentional. I wanted to not take on more than I can chew. I have someone who helps me one day a week kind of with farm work. And then I do have people who help me when it comes to like picking and packing produce for the farm stand. But for the most part, it is just me right now. So it needed to still be a manageable amount of space. But yeah, that's definitely something I value as important. And I recognize that for a lot of farms, like that's not as important, and that is totally fine. And, I think Instagram, we only see the pictures of like the perfectly weeded rows and farms. And that's not real life. And there are definitely areas of our farm that don't look perfect. And I think it's important that, folks, have a style of farming and aesthetic that makes sense for them.
Right. And it also, we all collectively have to acknowledge that, those farms that put up only the good pictures, they do have some spots like that. We all do.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Michelle Aronson, thank you so much for your time. This has been a fun chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And just thank you for offering this podcast. I think the work that we all do can often feel a bit solitary. So it's really nice to feel like we're not alone out there. So thanks for this work that you're doing. All right, if you enjoyed that episode, you can find more of Michelle's work by following her on Instagram at Farmbelly or at www.farmbelly.com. Also, check out the video we referenced with Josh Satin of Satin Hill Farm on his YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to the Winter Growers podcast wherever you get podcasts. Also, if you want another way to support our work but are into physical objects, you're in luck. You can pre-order a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at no-tillgrowers.com, and the proceeds from that sale go to making more content. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you're getting it and leave a review. But this week, all reviews must start with what you were going to write in your review, but then also how COVID changed that. Big thanks as always to Jackson Roulette and Josh Satin for their help. Thanks to Willie Breeding for the theme music and for fielding my text messages about this year's UK basketball team at all hours. Huge thanks as always to Hannah Crabtree, my wife and partner, for just being absolutely amazing all the time and also dealing with my concerns with the UK men's basketball team at all hours. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye. Other nurseries and even just local farms to work with and to get a lot of our starts from. So I don't know, I just, if there's other, especially like people who are just starting out, people who might find that useful to hear someone else who's not like trying to do everything all at once.
Yeah, I think that's a great topic of conversation because I do think there is a stigma around that, and that people try to do it all and it ends up going even worse because then you just throw another giant variable in the mix.
Right. Yeah, because if you mess it up, I mean, that's like all your plans for the season. And, yeah,